the first presentation is going to be introduced by the Reverend Sally Shaw, who is the United Church of Canada Formation Director. So I'm going to turn it over to Sally.
Welcome to those of you who are joining us for the very first time this afternoon, and welcome back to those of you who have been with us since the very beginning. I have the privilege of introducing Alicia and her presentation to you today. Alicia and I share a love of camping, which comes from many wonderful years of being a part of Presbytery summer church camps. Both of us, our paths to ministry traveled straight through summer camp, and we both believe that camping changes lives. And that's what we're going to hear about today from Alicia. Alicia started at summer church camp at the age of 7 at McLennan Memorial Camp in Chance Harbor, Nova Scotia, and she fell in love with it then and there. It's been an important part of her faith journey and her journey towards ministry. Now, when Alicia was at camp, she had a strong faith background and a strong connection to the camping experience. She noticed around her people who didn't have a strong faith background, but did have that same strong connection to camp. And she really wondered what that experience is like or was like for them. And so she designed her grad project to ask that very question, to find out that very thing. So welcome, Alicia. We look forward to hearing what you learned.
I invite you to this place on a warm summer's afternoon. It is here that I had one of the deepest theological conversations I've had about faith in God that I remember. It was here on the beach over an afternoon agape meal of grapes and bread. Of course, our discussion led to the Eucharist, which led to a discussion of the resurrection of Jesus. I was not surrounded by published theologians or my fellow AST classmates. I was sharing in conversation with a group of teenage boys, many of whom do not attend church. Through my work at United Church camps the past 5 years, I was always pleasantly surprised by how profoundly deep these campers and staff could express their spirituality, and how willingly and honestly they would offer extemporaneous prayer. As someone who always saw church camp as the summer version of Sunday school, as I grew up in the church, I was intrigued that there were so many people with no faith background that were highly engaged and spiritually active within a United Church camping context. I wondered what brought them and caused them to stay in a place whose mission is to nurture Christian development in a natural and fun environment. Camping has a long history. An early form of Christian camping here in North America was the camp meetings of the 18th and 19th centuries. Author Clarice Bowman writes in Spiritual Values in Camping that circuit riders would gather in brush arbors, as there was a lack of buildings large enough to hold large gatherings of people to share the gospel. Within the United Church of Canada, camping has been an important part of its ministry since the beginning. According to the United Church published document on camping called Who We Are, over 20,000 campers attend one of over 60 United Church camps across Canada each summer. While exact statistics are unknown, it is obvious from my research and my discussions with other camp leaders that a number of these campers have no connection to the United Church of Canada or any faith tradition. What do they receive from this form of faith formation? What do they learn and experience in this context? And what can the spiritual experience of these campers and staff teach the United Church? All of these questions led me to my research question. What is the spiritual experience of United Church campers who do not attend church? In this question, the term campers refers to those who have been campers at a United Church camp at some time, even though they may now currently or most recently have been staff. Both their time as campers and staff have been important to them and are considered part of their camping experience in this study. In order to best answer my research question, I decided to conduct my research using a phenomenological approach. John Cresswell describes a phenomenological study as the study of common meaning for individuals of lived experiences. From such a study, themes or essences are derived. I invited camp people who wish to share their experience by inviting my participants through social media, through the National Camping Facebook page, and also through other United Church camps pages. All interviews were conducted in person or using Skype if distance was too great, and audio only was recorded in both cases. I sought to interview 5 individuals between the ages of 18 and 24 who had at least 3 years of camping experience within the United Church of Canada and who didn't attend worship services. I chose to explore this group because I wanted them to be at an age where their decision to attend both camp and church was a decision that they made on their own. I did not seek to find long-term camp people who deeply loved camp, but that is what I received. My participants have a combined total of 69 years of camping experience and are from a variety of United Church camps across Canada, participating in many aspects of camp, from counselor, camper, director, and even sitting on the camp board. All of my participants have been given pseudonyms, and camp names have been removed. Let me introduce you to my participants: Lily, Lavender, Penelope, Katie, and my one male participant, Oliver. After conducting and transcribing my interviews, I read and analyzed the transcripts, discovering the essence of their lived experiences at camp, their thoughts of church, and their decision not to attend. My participants shared with me graciously and enthusiastically about their camping experience. For my participants, camp was an exciting world of friends and fun, whether they were campers or staff. All of the camps were described as places of beauty. All of my participants spoke about having designated times for Christian education as well as times for worship. The Christian education program took on a variety of forms. I purposely sought to discover the spiritual experience of those campers who do not attend church. 2 main reasons came up for not attending. For some, it had to do with schedules, with work, school, and activities scheduled for Sunday mornings. Most of my participants also found church to be too formal for their liking. Katie had this to say about church: faith, or religion in society, it seems so organized. I mean, in church, it's I read this part and then you read that part. It's kind of structured. At camp, it just seems much more fluid. It's kind of spontaneous and just happens. It kind of goes with the flow. The formal, organized aspect of church often made my participants feel uncomfortable and made church seem foreign to them. I wish to compare what they thought of the United Church to their experience. All of my participants described the United Church as accepting, open, and welcoming. Lavender told me this about her experience at a camp gathering at a United Church where she saw the rainbow flag on the front lawn of the church. She said, I was just so proud to be affiliated with a church that could fly that flag so proudly right in front of their church and just be that accepting. What was very interesting was that my participants used many of the same words to describe camp as they did the United Church. From their experience, 3 main themes arose. But first, let us listen to God's word. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. Psalm 19. Just as the writers of the Psalms spoke about nature and gave praise to God for creation, so do my participants. For my participants, nature was an important aspect of their spirituality of camp. It was a key factor of the place and helped to make it special. A few of my participants commented on it being an ever-present thing in connection with their spirituality. Katie stated, "I think there's just something about being in the area, in the location, being on the property, and just having that feeling the moment you're there." Vespers was an important part of nature that all my participants spoke of. Vespers is an evening worship service, but the space was also used for morning worship. In all of the camps my participants spoke of, the Vespers was a special place on the camp property, set in the woods or near a body of water, such as a lake or the ocean. Penelope spoke about how she felt in her camp's worship space. "I'd be sitting there and I'd just get the shivers down my spine with whatever song we sang together. It just felt so meaningful, and that there was a presence right there in the middle of the woods while we were all together." Oliver stated about his camp's outdoor chapel. "The space is just always so beautiful, and it's just known that it's a space where we're going to. The tone changes." Vespers was also an important space for prayer, both communal and individual prayer. Lavender had this to say, "My first couple years as a camper, I was kind of scared of Vespers, because you'd see people praying, but I had never grown up in church. So at first, being at Vespers was like, who is this person that people are staying behind and talking to? Why are people staying behind and praying and being quiet?" But then honestly, by the end of the week, the first time, I was like, whoa, I want to stay, I want to talk, I want to have this time of reflection. As a camper, I kept getting more connected with it. My participants spoke about experiencing the presence of God in nature. They recognized God in the beauty and awe of all creation that surrounded them. Lily spoke of a particular morning when she experienced God. "We woke up the senior kids early before breakfast, and we all went for a sunrise canoe. We could see the sun coming up over the water, and the water was like glass. It was beautiful. And in that moment, I knew there was something bigger out there, like watching over you, that creates this beauty every single day. It was amazing." This was even viewed in one participant's decision not to attend church. When asked about why he decided not to attend, Oliver responded, "Because that building doesn't do it for me. There's something more beautiful about being in nature to me than building up this building with the stained glass windows. It's just being in a building in the middle of the concrete jungle, the city, it just doesn't feel spiritual to me at all." Nature was a very important aspect for all my participants. Space was a very important part of that nature. Dr. Rebecca Nye, a well-known researcher of children's spirituality and writer of a book with the same title, named 6 criteria of spiritual foundation. These 6 criteria form the lovely acronym SPIRIT: space, process, imagination, relationship, intimacy, and trust. Unfortunately, I will not have time today to focus on all of them. My participants' experience of camp is an example of the criteria of space. Rebecca Nye recognizes that space helps us to, quote, enter into God's presence. This space becomes a sanctuary. Our experience is here convincing us that this is both a holy and safe space to be, end quote. For Nye, space is both physical and emotional. The space must be set apart, having a threshold. For my participants, much of camp, and particularly Vespers, would be a space for spiritual foundation. Lavender found that safety in the space in her story about prayer. All of my participants recognized that the space was special or sacred and set apart. Theologian and educator Reverend Dr. John Westerhoff III states in his book, Will Our Children Have Faith?, that arts and beauty are a means of revelation of the presence of truth and goodness and of God. He expressed the importance of regaining the ability to wonder, create, and dream within the context of Christian education. My participants were in awe of the natural beauty that surrounded them at their camps. They spoke about feeling a connection with God in this place, and spoke of taking time for reflection and activity within this natural setting. Let us hear a story from Acts 2. Many miracles and wonders were being done through the apostles, and everyone was filled with awe. All the believers continued together in close fellowship and shared their belongings with one another. Day after day, they met as a group in the temple, and they had their meals together in their homes, eating with glad and humble hearts, praising God and enjoying the goodwill of the people. And every day the Lord added to their group those who were being saved. Like the early church, camp is a community, even though it may only be for 1 week. Campers and staff share meals together. They play and learn together. They worship together. Community is a large part of my participants' spiritual experiences. I've divided their experience of community into 2 parts, the shared and individual aspects of community. The shared community was an important part of their spirituality. Oliver shared this story. When he was a camper, one of the other boys set off a fire extinguisher. The director told the boys that unless someone fessed up, they would all have to sit out of the final game, which was usually a highlight of the week. Oliver took the blame, even though he didn't do it. He had to sit out of the game, but one by one, the boys showed up and joined Oliver in solidarity. He said, "The next morning, we did this huge talk about that's how community is supposed to work. It just showed, I think, how a bunch of very different people will come together and do amazing things that you would never expect. That, to me, is faith. Community is a huge part of faith for me." All of my participants named camp as a home away from home. This was reflected in the acceptance and love they found at camp as part of the shared community. Katie had this to say about camp. "One of the things I liked about camp was that you could just do funny things and no one was judging you. It's just, you can be yourself. Obviously, it's not always perfect, but sometimes it just feels like it is." Oliver added, "I think that the fact that nobody ever knows their background, nobody knows what family they came from, nobody knows the moneyed and poor, and the delinquent kid can feel like the most normal kid, and the kid that's shy can suddenly sing and dance." Penelope simply stated, "Our goal is just to let the campers know that God loves them." So what exactly does community look like at camp? All of my participants talked about two aspects of community: living and learning together. Campers live together, literally, within cabins, but also live together as a whole, sharing in meals and fun together. They also learn together. All of my participants, when asked about their Christian education component, spoke about the importance of learning together and talking and listening to one another. Oliver shared a story about leading Christian education time with a group of teenagers. You know, we would all sit in a circle, and there would be like 60 of us. There was so much discussion, and it came from every single individual. And I feel like I created a space where all of us were just this little community together, and I was really moved by that group. Small group experiences within the larger group setting were also important. Lavender spoke about one of these moments when she was a counselor. One evening, when Vespers had moved one of her campers to tears, they spent some time discussing the little girl's grandmother who had recently died. Lavender spoke about how they missed campfire. I was really glad because I got to know this little girl so well, and I was really happy just thinking about how awesome it was that she was feeling better about herself. The community was also the foundation for self-growth for my participants. Lavender spoke about learning life skills. She told me that whenever she was asked if she had dealt with certain situations, that she always went to examples from camp, even if she had seen it elsewhere in her daily life. Penelope said, "It's a place where I found myself, and I've grown into that person. Because of camp, I've found I've grown so much that it's time for me to take what I've learned from camp into the real world." Theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes in his book, Life Together, that Christian community is a community of truth, light, fellowship, service, and love. He expresses that the Christian community is one that is called by Christ, moved by the Holy Spirit, to share in agape love with one another. For my participants, camp is a Christian community that allows campers to be who they are and live and share with one another. Sharing stories, biblical and personal, as well as reflecting on both together, were important to my participants' experiences. John Westerhoff states that when a faith community story becomes our story, God's presence among us becomes part of our experience. My participants have learned the biblical stories through their experience of camp with one another. Dr. Rebecca Nye's criteria for spiritual foundation, relationship, and intimacy were also important aspects of my campers' experiences. Nye writes that having space for a relationship with God, as well as one another, is part of the foundation of spirituality. Nye also stresses the importance of intimacy, creating safe spaces for individuals to come closer to God and to each other. For my participants, some of their most meaningful and spiritual moments at camp were those that allowed them to share in community and to know one another on a deeply spiritual level. A story from Matthew 28. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded to you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age." While my participants may not label themselves as Christians, they do communicate and value aspects of discipleship within their spiritual experience. All of my participants spoke about the value of learning about the Bible and the Christian faith, as well as how to live in a community, as valuable aspects of their camping experience. They described the learning they received as being simple and practical in form. Katie spoke about how her camp incorporated godly play into their Christian education curriculum. It was well received by campers and staff alike, as it gave everyone the chance to wonder and reflect on the biblical story in an interactive way. All of my participants spoke about how learning of biblical stories was integrated into the daily life and activities of the camp. Oliver said, "I really liked when someone could apply it, and not just biblically, but really relate it to what's going on in our lives. And I took that as my time for spiritual growth." I guess faith is kind of about talking about the real stuff that happens to us too, and I feel like that happened a lot. In some cases, however, it wasn't as obvious that learning was involved until some time after, when my participants had time to reflect on the event. Lavender said, "Growing up, when you go to camp, you don't even really know what you're doing until you're doing it. You don't really feel any religious aspect to it until you sit down and your counselor finally talks to you about it, and you're like, whoa, wait a second, I just made this spiritual connection. Like, what? You thought you were just crossing a rope bridge for the hell of it, but you were actually trusting everyone around you to catch you if you fell. You were never forced into this religious aspect, but all of a sudden you would leave with this huge spiritual awakening that you would have no idea that you'd even had." Not only were my participants learning about the Bible and the Christian faith, they also spoke about sharing what they had learned by teaching others. This was particularly seen once they had become counselors and staff. My participants had been transformed by their experience and learning and wanted to communicate that experience with others. Lavender shared this about her experience of sharing Vespers as a counselor. "And when you got that experience of getting to stay behind with a child for a little while, that turned into my spiritual time. It wasn't really my time anymore. It was my time to teach and help the other person, which was really, really cool. I really enjoyed that aspect of it for sure." All of my participants valued being able to share their spirituality with others in the camping context. They recognized their experience and their ability to share that experience as a key part of their spirituality. Reverend Dr. John Westerhoff III states, quote, "Experience is foundational to faith. A person first learns Christ not as a theological affirmation, but as an effective experience," end quote. When speaking with my participants, they learned about God through their experience, more so than through studying biblical stories. Their lived experience of living and learning within a community of faith helped them to grow in their spirituality. It led them to be able to recognize the importance of sharing this faith or spirituality with others, and sought to create a space where others could grow in their experience of God. Westerhoff reflected on the life of Jesus, stating, quote, "The Word became flesh. Word and deed are never separated," end quote. For my participants, the biblical stories are alive and active. They learn the biblical narrative through activity and living in community. It is through this community that they continue to share the good news of the gospel with others within their camping community. So what can we learn from campers' experiences? How can their experience inform how we live as both the church and camp? My participants illustrated Rebecca Nye's 6 criteria for spiritual foundation. While I did not have time to focus on all of them, these elements are crucial for us to nurture within both our camps and our churches. I would particularly endorse the use of imagination in our churches, as this was something that was lacking for my participants. I invite you to use your imagination to discover new ways your congregation can engage in worship and praise of God, whether it be through art, activity, song, prayer, whatever you can imagine. All of my participants spoke about the flexibility of camp in comparison to the church. While having a liturgy and an order of service is important, my participants would encourage to leave some room for the Holy Spirit too. leave some space for congregational response and prayer. At camp, we would call this a popcorn prayer because the community is invited to pop like popcorn with their additions to the prayer, not worrying about talking at the same time or leaving spaces for silence. Nature is an important aspect of the spiritual experience of camp. While it's probably not possible for the church community to worship outdoors every Sunday, there are some things the church can learn from their experience. Taking time for awe and wonder was an important part of the spiritual experience for these campers. As the United Church, we also need to take time to be awestruck by the beauty that surrounds us, both natural and man-made. Many of our churches have beautiful spaces with amazing stained glass. But how often do we give ourselves time to admire in awe and beauty? Camps may seem very different from our United Churches, but we are connected. As camps, we are recognized, funded, and overseen by the United Church of Canada. One thing I heard from my participants is that what they experience at camp is only seen at camp, and often only stood and acknowledged there. My participants longed for others to understand what kind of place camp is. I encourage camps and United Churches to try to do a better job of talking to one another all 12 months of the year, not just those closest to the camping season. I encourage churches to recognize and celebrate Camping Sunday and actively involve your local campers. While not everyone who attends camp has gone or will go to church, camp is still a valuable avenue for faith formation in a fun and loving community. Camp is not always a means for conversion or filling the pews. However, camp is a way for campers to learn about and experience God. As the church, let us share in that awe and take time to wonder about how the Holy Spirit is working among us and recognize God in the everyday. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. Do we have any questions for Alicia today or comments on her presentation? Oh, over here.
I feel I don't see too many questions. This is their presentation and their question. Quiet answer. I have a great question. For your non-churchgoers who attend camp, I was struck by their their receptivity to the beauty of nature and the experience of community and acceptance, say, from your provider. I just wonder, do they would you think that some of them would move through a process of pantheism before sort of any sort of theological understanding? I was feeling the place for everything and everything that's place, almost like a Genesis experience, rather than sort of a New Testament Christian experience. And maybe going back a second and a third year, like they would maybe cop on to some of the more Christian themes. But earlier on, I just wonder if there's that sort of movement almost through Old Testament before they get into Christianity, if their sort of ability to sit and participate in the Christian experience is more tolerance for people who are within this community.
I think that's a really interesting question. It's kind of one of those, which came first, the chicken or the egg, I find with this group, because it's kind of hard to separate it. I think there is definitely an aspect of that, but at the same time, the way that they're kind of experiencing it is through a Christian context, one that does tell the stories of Jesus and, talks about a lot of things that happen in the New Testament, referring to biblical letters and engaging in that. So I think it's really hard to separate out because of the context they're in. Had I talked to them maybe before they started camp, I might have had a better idea of that, but I think the least amount of time one of my participants had been in was 9 years, so I've kind of known them after they've grown up and engaged in that context, so I think it's really hard to say.
Alicia, I'm wondering if you got from your subjects any sense of what they do or where they go for the 9 months of the year they're not at camp to sustain their faith and their sense of spirituality that is so enriched during the summer. Or did you get a sense that they think they get a heavy dose of it in July and August, and so they're okay for the rest of the year? Did they say anything about what they do instead of going to church to sustain their sense of connection and faith?
Yeah, for sure. It was really split down the middle with my participants. Some of them found it really hard. They didn't have anything during the year, and their kind of daily schedule didn't allow them to as well. I mean, they were interested in it, but just to find the space to actually go. So for those ones, they found it really hard because they knew how amazing it could be to be in a spiritual context and have this connection with God, but it wasn't something they could always connect to. And for those that did kind of feel that through the rest of the year, it was often through activities and styles of worship that they experienced within the camp context. Nature being part of it, but also sharing in small group sharing, and whether that be through meals or just talking and having deep conversations with others, meditation, reading the Bible. Like, it was more through things that were similar to their camp experience that allowed them to, for those that actually did feel it, but not all of them did.
I'm allowed to follow up, by the way. It raises a question for me in terms of implications for the church. Is that if there's a congregation, particularly one that is in a location where, as it happens, they know because there's a university nearby, for example, that there are a lot of regular camp staff that are in the area. If that church wants to intentionally reach out to them, how might they go about doing that to let the non-attending camp people know that they're going to try and find a way to incorporate them? How would you suggest going about doing that?
Well, I'm going to answer your question in 3 parts. I think the first one is being flexible with schedule. That was a big thing I heard from my participants, was just they weren't able to make a Sunday morning, so having things that were different times. Number 2, I would argue, would be advertising. If you let the camps know and pass it on, because if you just have it posted up in your church, nobody outside your church is going to see it. So it's not going to get to them. So posting it on Facebook or, sending it to your camp registrar, that's a great way. And in terms of what to actually do, allowing them to have time to engage with one another on a spiritual level, sharing in stories, and just being together, and allowing them to have that space to have discussions about God and not having answers, and making sure they're feeling accepted.
Another question? One comment and question. You quoted Dietrich Bonhoeffer about community. When you talked about the benefits of community, the good things about it. But he also talked a lot about how community is not for the faint of heart. And it's not all one thing.
Yeah.
And so I think about do we soft pedal Christianity, what Christianity really is, by sort of giving this, it's all this one warm and fuzzy, let's everybody sing kumbaya kind of thing. Okay, so that's my point. Question is, all right, so you're arguing that camping is, and I would agree, camping is a great means of faith formation. But these people don't go to church. So you're saying that you don't have to go to church to be a good person of faith.
So I didn't really get the question part of that.
Are you saying that?
Is that no, actually I'm not. there's just so much data, I can't fit it all in. I think for my campers, my participants, they actually recognized that it wasn't always perfect, and I think there's a level of humanity within that. I think Bonhoeffer would even agree that, nothing's perfect. This community that we strive for isn't perfect, and for my participants, although they have a deep love of camp, they recognize that not every moment's perfect, and not every moment's going to be, they're still going to have arguments and fights and all of this, but at the same time, they were able to recognize that, we aren't perfect, and that we can have this conversation after this bad thing happened, and being able to move forward from it and grow and learn from it, which I think is a bit what Bonhoeffer was trying to get at.
Do we have time for one?
Yes.
Are there any questions over here?
So camp also has played a big role in my life, and over the last 10 years, particularly in the Maritimes, we've seen at least 4 of our camps close. And my question is, how do we, camp is an amazing place for many people, yet it touches so many lives, yet they're closing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's the same sort of thing with churches, but how do we tell that story so that we can, especially in the United Church, use that E word, evangelism, go out and tell people to come to camp?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think it's one of those things, because I have seen, having been involved with camp for a while, I have seen some of those church camps closes, and some of the churches as well. And it's really sad, and it often comes down to money and staff and all those things that are really important to it, but aren't necessarily the part about evangelizing. So I think in order to share that experience, I think we actually have to, just like within the church, I think we have to be better and more courageous about actually sharing that. I don't think it has to necessarily be just inside of our 4 walls. I think we need to go outside them and be imaginative in how we do that, whether it is through social media or having other events throughout the year, or just sharing it in a way and engaging those that have been actually touched by it. People aren't going to come to our churches or camps if we just stick some financial statements up on the wall. They're going to come when they hear, this amazing story about how a camper that had been really shy is now able to sing and dance, or how people in our congregation had a similar experience of, being really sad and upset about something, but finding hope and light within a church. So I think we have to be courageous and share that.
Has anyone been waiting to ask a question?